Welcome, everybody. I'm April Bosshard. I'm here with Crystal today on the Strategic Authorpreneur. Glad to be talking about what it means to be a writer.
Welcome to episode 18 of the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. On today's show, we're diving deep into story and the role it plays in our writing lives with special guest and story coach, April Bosshard. But first, our weekly report on what we've been up to this week and what goodies we have found for you that might be helpful.
It's so good that we get to have this time with you to share what we have been learning in the past week. And there is one book that was just released by one of the self-publishers that I follow. And for the folks that are watching us on YouTube, the name of the book is Following, and it's from David Gaughran. It's a very short book, and it's free if you sign up to his mailing list. David did not pay me to suggest this book. I really literally devour it. It's super short, but basically what it says and what really is important for me, it's all about the author platform, which is something that I didn't see outside really people talking about. Now, David knows what he's talking about. From page 1, you can see there are few things that he says on this book, which is, again, super short. And there are 3 things that he focuses on. I'm not going to go into the deep of the book, but the 3 elements he's constantly focusing on this book is your website as an author, your mailing list, and your Facebook page. If you have these 3 things and you're rocking on these 3 things, you're going to have a way better time than the competition that other authors out there. So definitely recommend Following, a marketing guide to author platform by David Gaughran. Again, very good. I strongly suggest this book if you're serious about your authorpreneur business. And writing and wordly wise, what happened to me in this past couple of weeks. Actually, we have been working, me and Crystal, in the past few days. We are trying to get me to understand Amazon ads, and we've been doing that for a couple of months now on the Italian store, Amazon.it, and I'm just now trying to understand how to do something similar on the US market. So in the next few days, I'm going to start doing promotion for my Dark Fantasy Lord of Time on that side too. So as I was saying to you, Crystal, the past hours I spent gathering keywords, not feedback, gathering keywords that I'm going to use to that side of the promotion. And again, I'm doing it very a low-key kind of gathering of keywords. I don't have any fancy software that helps me, so I've been doing it the simple way of just taking one keyword, copy and paste. So nothing exciting, but it's something that we need to do to understand a bit more how to push those books on front of as much reader as we can. And writing-wise, I am working on the 7th story as I'm speaking to you, and hopefully the readers are going to like it. So I want to know what you have been up to, Crystal.
Well, I have been continuing on with writing-related things, which is exciting in my world. So I have purchased Plotter, which is a newer tool in the marketplace that just did a huge kind of launch stuff a little while ago, and I bought it as one of the founding people and started poking around in it because that's what I love to do with tools. And it's really interesting, actually. It has a combination of the ability to sort of store all your series Bible information. So your characters, your locations that you use, you can have outlines for different books. And also if you put your different books into a series, you can see the timelines for your whole series, which is great. It does a bit of a mashup for you. And there's also a bunch of built-in timelines and beat sheets and outlining kind of frameworks that you can make use of. So you can actually choose from a huge list of things and load the beats or the outline notes into your project and then fill those in for yourself. And so what happened is I've always used Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, which is a tiny little book, but very, very powerful. And it outlines 20 story beats that always happen in romance novels. So I use that for short fiction and also for longer fiction. And I just find it really, really helpful. It is one of the sets of beats that you can load in the outliner. But there was two other romance outlining structures that I hadn't really used before. One was by Jamie Gold, and I haven't dug into that one yet, so I'll save that for a future episode. And the other one was, there were 7, but he's added one apparently as the new edition of the book has come out, but it's called Writing the Romantic Comedy, and it's by Billy Murnett. And it's a screenwriting book, so it's about how to do that in a movie format primarily, but our brains are so programmed for that structure, and it's really similar what we do in novels, particularly if you are hoping your novels will get adapted into screenplays at some future time. Then writing with a bit of a screenplay framework in mind is a smart strategic way to approach that. So those are the 2 books that I've been kind of rereading or reading for the first time as I am playing around with Plotter's functionality and just figuring out how it's going to work for outlining for me. And so I've been working on outlining. And we are going to be talking with April Bosshard today and digging into, what a story coach is, and also talking about how story really impacts our lives and how we work our way around in story as a bit of a way of life. So without further ado, let's dig into that. We'll be back at the end to chat some more. April and we had a lot of fun when we were just starting to get caught up about how it was we met. And I think that's an interesting story to start off with. Is people often ask, how do I find guests for the podcast, or where and how do I meet the people who I know in my writerly world? And I think that makes for an interesting story because the recommendation actually came from Claire, who was a previous guest on the podcast. And I had only just met Claire a couple weeks before that at an event, which was sort of the last thing I attended before the COVID lockdown, which was a productivity workshop. And we happened to sit beside each other and we got to chatting and we got along well. And I said, oh, would you like to be on a podcast? And so that's how Claire came to be here. And after her interview, I said, oh, do you know anyone else who you think would be a really good fit for what we're doing here? And she said, I do, actually. I'll send you some information. And it was April's name that she sent me. And when I reached out and April reached back, it turned out that in fact, we did know each other already. We just hadn't connected all the pieces. So do you maybe want to tell that story from your side of the fence?
Sure. The thing is that at first I didn't think that I knew you when Claire introduced us. And putting those pieces together, I realized that actually Crystal and I had met, 10 years ago. I think it's just under. So 10 years ago this October. And what you were using your other name, Crystal Stranahan.
Crystal Stranahan.
I mean, I use it still, but so I had to put those pieces together, like, wow. And it really made me reflect on what I've done since, how much has happened, what made me wonder what you've been up to, because we crossed paths at a pitch workshop that you and Jared, I guess, were hosting right before the Surrey Writers Conference. And so we had an evening workshop where we were practicing our pitches, and I think I spoke to you guys after as well about a novel I was working on at the time, and went on to go to the conference and pitched really successfully. I mean, not as successfully as I would have liked, but I did have some good interest. I had 2 publishers, 2 agents interested, and went through all those motions, but didn't sell that particular novel at that particular time. So then our paths just diverged. Like I went a whole bunch of different directions, and you did too. And this is how we came to reconnect, which was really fun and funny. And did make me think quite a bit about what I'd done. At first, I was thinking, oh, I haven't done enough. As writers, we're just so hard on ourselves about what have we done? Nothing. Always telling ourselves it's not enough. It's not enough. But then I really had to add up, okay, what are all the things? What are all the pieces? What are the stages? And it became an interesting story that we talked about on the phone then. And it was really, it meant a lot just to go through all those times and see what we've been doing. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when people refer you back into someone else's life, when there's multiple connections from other sources and your paths cross. I think that's always an interesting little nod from the universe, that it's time to check in, and it's time to kind of see. It's a really great opportunity when that happens, to do that sort of inventory of looking back on, as you said, what have I done? What is different? And we had that moment on the phone where we realized we weren't actually strangers. And then it was all of a sudden, wait, okay, well, wow, where were we? We lived in a different location. We were running our children's book publishing company still. It was Gumboot Books Days. And, literally a different person under a different name, not as a CIA alias kind of thing. I just got married in between. So there's a few interesting shifts that happened on both sides. So I was really interested to find out what you were doing now, which is your company called Deep Story Design. And I would love if you'll talk a little bit about what you're doing, but also, what did that grow out of?
Okay. So let me think about, that's a longer story. It made me think of something too that you said about when people come back into your life and it's time to pay attention, and you realize that they were there all along, but at the periphery for a while. And that always reminds me of story, so the people who do resurface, they have a role to play. They had a role, there's another one. And I'm always paying attention to the things that repeat or come back, as you mentioned. At the time when I was writing young adult fantasy. So that's how our paths crossed initially. And I was loving that. And it was the first book of a trilogy. And as I said, I had some interest. But when things didn't happen easily following that conference, I kind of crashed. And I think it's something a lot of writers face. You think the hard part is writing the book. And it was hard. It took a long time. And I poured my heart into it and learned a lot of craft on the way. But it also didn't have that sort of happy ending where the fairy godmother comes along and, bats you on the head with her sparkly wand. And we all kind of dream for that in the early days, I think, before we are initiated into all the other elements of writing, the book world and the people and publishing. So I had some disappointment there, and I sort of put everything in a drawer for a while, and then I dusted things off again. And I went through, I didn't try that hard beyond that time. That's what I look back on and regret, that I didn't know enough to really just go for it. Like, don't wait for 10 rejections, wait for 100. I mean, if you have to, wait for 1,000, but learn from them along the way. But, don't give up. And I think I kind of gave up a little too early, but it did mean that I took some interesting paths along the way. So I switched genres and I started writing in romance. I kind of jumped on a bandwagon with a friend of mine, and just on a lark, really, and wrote essentially a novel, one installment at a time, and published it independently on Amazon when that was really just getting going. And that ended up being very liberating and crazy. And, it was under pen name, so I felt much freer to do that. But it all worked out, it all worked out. The story worked out, even though I was just going forward. And I ended up writing more, about three novels and a novella in that genre before then switching again to cozy mystery. And I've written a series trilogy in cozy mystery under a different pen name. But in that time, what was growing was deep story design. So I have also worked with writers and edited and taught little workshops and things over the years. My background is originally in film and television. So I worked in film production, and I have a degree in film and television. So I kind of come from that background, but I had to step out of working in the industry at a certain point when I had my kids. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to focus on writing. So all along, basically since I was about 19, I've been focusing on what is story? How does it work? How do I make it work? Initially it was just for me. How do I understand so that my story can work so I can get out in the world? But I also found that I loved studying it. I loved paying attention to it. I never tired of it. And it's one of the reasons why I stuck to writing is I never tired of studying. I mean, I'm looking at your bookshelf behind and I could recognize it's sort of fuzzy, but I can recognize titles. I'm like, God, I want that one. And so I just kept following that love. So I would follow whatever I loved in the moment that I was writing, or was whatever I was curious about, something that was bringing me joy. But I also stayed with this engagement with this mystery of what is story. So that I was also waiting for it all to come together. I would journal about like, I've got it, I've almost got it. It's just that elusive. And then at some point, some things changed in my life, some pretty big things. And it coincided with kind of the penny dropping, to use that cliche, but something just kind of clicked. And I got something in a whole new way that allowed me to kind of just write out, like just almost download some of these ideas that just seem to work in a really clear, articulate way. I mean, story is incredibly complex, but it's something that we know so intimately in our own psyches. And I'll say to people, it's like, to study story, it's like the brain trying to study the brain. We can only look in that funhouse mirror, pattern for so long before we go a little bit crazy. So it's in and out, we learn something, we pull back, and we apply it, we pull back. So when deep story design evolved, it was right after I was invited to teach a workshop in Paris, which is my favorite place. And it was a workshop on story structure. So I was just, because I was like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I can certainly put something together. The core of that became deep story design. And that was in 2014. So I'd say it really started in 2015, but it brings together a whole lifetime, like 25 years of study and work and a lot of trial and error. I have to just, that's one thing I really loved about our conversation is we were just really frank about, gee, I went down this path and that one didn't work. And I went down that path and it didn't work. And I kept going. I kept following something wherever it was leading me. And when that came together, and I started offering workshops with deep story designs. That's how it first started, was as a weekend workshop. I was so nervous and scared, but I was so in my element at the same time. Like I felt something completely shift inside me. Like I was, riding on the tip of a wave. I could have crashed at any moment, but I was just completely alive. And so I felt really aligned with that more than anything else, which was a really interesting thing to learn to accept. The experience, of course, made it very clear, so I could trust it. Mm-hmm. But it shifted my relationship with writing too. It's like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? Am I a better teacher than a writer? Like, wait a minute, I don't want to.
Yeah, there's that expression that those who can't do teach, and I just want to smash. I want to stitch that onto something and burn it. Like it just makes me crazy. But I think it is something really interesting that we hear. You want to be successful in this business. You pick a niche, you pick your lane, you stay in it. That's all you do. Yeah. And I think there is a certain amount of truth to that. Like if your goal is to be in the number one spot in a certain category on Amazon, or you want to be the top of the Kindle store or whatever, then yes, pick that lane and become the master of that. And you won't have time for anything else. But I think there's also those of us who come at story where the story is the thing, that it isn't really the genre you're writing in or just an experience of a certain type of form. Like you might like short stories, you might like writing full-length novels, maybe those epic 200,000 word, deep fantasy stories. But I think that is interesting that you talked about, there's all these pieces and then at some point you feel a click, like everything has aligned. And I think putting together the life of a writer is like making a puzzle and you don't know what the picture is at the end. And so you are picking up pieces from all over the place as you go on these little adventures. And we both have had a lot of I won't call them failed experiments because I think they did the job they were supposed to do, which was to teach us things as we went along. But we've done a lot of testing. We've done a lot of like door peeking where you sort of, oh, let me open this door and look behind it. And maybe I'll walk through and I'll try some things out for a while. And then, okay, I think I've got what I need to get from this part. And then you come back and you think of another door. And so I think that's an interesting way to sort of think about your career, and the evolution in the last decade for both of us has been about collecting puzzle pieces that we had to figure out how to put together. And until you figure out how to put them together, you don't know what the picture on the puzzle is. And so that makes it challenging. You have to put them together with blind faith, basically, that you're picking up things that are going to be useful and that you just have to figure out where they go and what to do with them. And so I feel like you found a really cool way in your workshops and your world of teaching story to combine an interesting mixture of backgrounds. And when your day job is something like production for film and television, and you have a cross setting experience of story, it's not just in a variety of genres inside the writing world, but it's also inside another type of storytelling world that I think there's a lot of power in pulling things from different areas and kind of seeing where the similarities and differences are. So maybe what are some of the things you think of when you think of story and how you've mashed up like the screenwriting world and the writing world from a more novelist type or memoirist type of place? What are some of the similarities that you really see standing out as across all of those different genres?
Okay, that's a big question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I just want to respond to something that you just said, because it was really wise. It was really wise about the putting together the puzzle pieces, and that comes when you get to be a writer like the way we are, I think, which is we're multi-talented. We have these multiple areas in which we could succeed. But do we want to go all out there or all out here? And we have a lot of interest. And I think I've learned to appreciate that now instead of see it as a problem. And when I do the teaching part around deep story design, I think about something that Julia Cameron wrote about. Well, she wrote a whole book about it called The Vein of Gold. I don't know if you know that one, The Vein of Gold. She talks about, there's an area where if you're lucky enough, you find that you fall into it, you kind of excel at it, you feel that alignment. But it doesn't mean you don't do a lot of other things. And she gave good examples with two actors. One was Meryl Streep, who we know as sort of the real high drama type person. And she excels at that, right? I mean, Oscar winning like crazy, but she loves comedy, but she's not in as many comedies. It's not what we want to see her do. It's not her thing, but she loves doing that. And conversely, Kevin Kline is great at comedy, but he also likes drama, but you don't see him in very many dramas. He's not as strong. So they've each found their sort of vein of gold. So I think if we're lucky enough to be able to find something like that, no matter when, it doesn't matter when, but then there's also these other interests. And I guess in my case, the interests have been able to weave together through film, novel, memoir. I've sort of stayed focused on story. Story became the kind of, it's the main underlying thread. And actually I would say there's another thread to that, because once I thought about my whole life and all the different things that I've done, and I travel a lot, and I ran a martial arts school, and I worked in a flower shop, and these weren't all distractions. They were all loves. I even worked in a restaurant for a while, but not till I was 40. It was a French restaurant, so I couldn't really turn it down that a friend was doing it. But I hadn't, I hadn't actually worked in a restaurant till that point, and I actually liked it, except it was hard on my feet after a while. But it was
good shoes are the key to restaurant job survival.
For sure. So I once stood back and sort of said, what do all these things have in common? Is there anything, or am I just crazy? Am I just like all over the map? And then I realized, for me personally, it was experience. All the things that I was doing helped provide an experience for somebody else. And that to me connected to what story is. It's an experience for the reader. And even for film, it starts off as somebody reads a script, right? The first few readers, they're reading scripts. So whether it's a viewer or a reader who's holding a book, we're giving them an experience. And so that was an interesting thing for me to identify. And it actually fed it into how I understand story, which is we're creating an emotional experience for a reader. We're creating, an intellectual experience, with the plot, and, putting all those pieces together. There's a puzzle that we're often laying out for readers to help solve, and hopefully they don't get it before we give them the punchline. But I took everything I learned from the film world and started applying it to the novelist world, because I couldn't go back to film at the time, but I was working with writers. So I started to overlap. And there's so much in film structure, as you know, because I'm sure you've read a lot of those books, film structure material that can feed into the novelist's work, because we've been trained to look at story through a film lens now. I mean, it's a sophisticated form of storytelling now. So we can't have those long meandering openings. And anyway, so I pulled those pieces together. What happened is, when it all clicked, I got so excited about it, and I wanted to tell other people, and I wanted to share it with other people. And I didn't really slow down enough to really apply it to my own work right away. And I've just been on this roll of sharing it and talking about it and articulating these complex ideas in ways that people seem to understand. Go, oh, okay. Oh, I get that now. I can make that work. And that's been really satisfying. And that's what I mean, that's where that vein of gold has come forward. It's like, oh, I like this. I like the connection. I like the communication. And I've got this manuscript over here that I want to deal with, because I want to put it all in there. But where am I going to find the time? Yeah. So now I'm putting those ideas into a nonfiction book, so that at least that's there to hand out. Mm-hmm. So it's not just me one-on-one. But I do want to get back to my own work, but I can't quite give up this fun stuff. I'm sure you understand that.
Yeah, I think we have very interesting parallel tracks in a lot of ways, which is, dipping our toes into so many areas means we have a sort of zoomed out understanding of how some of the things work. And then working with clients, you get to see so many projects. I think I was doing some reflecting the other day, and I think that I've helped produce more than 500 books in the last 10 years. Wow. Me consulting on other people's projects, and, teaching classes where the kids ended up with a book at the end of it, and combining all the one-on-one coaching and the things we've produced for companies. And when you've been through the process that many times for other people, not to mention, your own sets of experiences on your own work, where you can sometimes be a little more risky and daring in your experiments, because it's not for someone else's stuff. You can fully own whatever the consequences might be of walking on the wild side with some of your strategies. But I think you get a very different view because of the volume of things that you're dealing with. And so it does help to have a perspective that lets you find those patterns in things, and also lets you see how the same tools are applied by different people in different situations, because that is part of stress testing any system or any book of wisdom that you're going to hand out to people, is seeing what does it turn into for them, right? It's like looking at a painting. You can paint it, but everyone who looks at it is going to see something slightly different or feel something different looking at it. So that is a really interesting side of things. And to cycle back around to something you said about the screenwriting and how we've been trained to process story through film and TV, and that is a very different medium. I think if we're talking about strategy and how you can set yourself up for success in your sort of indie publishing journeys as well, if you have an understanding of how something would be different when it's adapted to the screen, I think it makes you a better writer in the moment as well. And it lets you create a product that would be more easily adaptable. If one of your goals is to sell your screenwrites for something that you've created, your novel or your memoir, if you understand how it would be turned into a movie or a TV series, then you can facilitate that a little bit with the product that you make, which is not to say throw out all the rules about writing a good novel, but there's definitely enough overlap that I think you can do something that works for both. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I agree, and for me, that's where story comes in, because the common element and the core element for both is story. And if we want to be thinking visually, I mean, we know this for fiction. Think visually, think about senses. There are a few different demands for each of the media, but but if you have your story down, you are kind of golden. And that's the thing that I find people struggle with that the most, is understanding just what's required at a craft level, basically a carpentry level, to do that work. And that's why when I started doing this, I really focused on story structure and character development, because I think those work obviously hand in hand to make story, but people don't necessarily understand that in a really deep way and why it's there. And so sometimes it seems like it's very technical in one regard, but until we understand the technicalities, we can't absorb them and then let them go, so that we can go back to the mystery of storytelling. So what's really important to me is to make sure that the whole person is involved. They are developing greater self-awareness and really know what matters to them, and they're writing what they can access from their depths, and then bringing the craft elements together, knowing how 3 acts work and knowing what goes on in each one, because it's a container for the complexity and mystery and depth that we can put into story. And you can do bits and different parts of it. Like you could just do the structure and make it all sort of quite formulaic and have it, really functional. And some people like to argue that a lot of genre fiction is like that, and there's no issue with that. That's totally fine. But if you have a really powerful story that you want to tell from the heart, you may have beautiful language, you may have a lot of passion and a lot of intelligence and great ideas, but it won't really communicate to somebody if you don't also have the structure. If you aren't following some of those rhythms and they're patterns, they're really recognizable patterns that we intuitively know and intuitively sense. So trying to sort of bring those two things together as much as possible. And to me, the story structure and the character development was a piece that some writers, they wobble on those things, or they aren't really sure. And so when I do work with writers about these things, I'll teach the things, but then eventually they'll bring a finished manuscript to me. And so I tend to work with clients sometimes on their finished manuscripts. I'm able to sort of sense what's missing. And like there might be a particular scene that's missing, or something might just be misplaced, like it really belongs at the second half of the second act and not in the beginning, or those kinds of things. Like, don't put backstory in the first act, always save that to the beginning of the first part of the second act, that kind of thing. And so there's sort of these sort of movements and tones and flavors that happen at different parts of the story, and that comes really naturally to me now in conversation and connection with another person. It's almost like there's stories in the room with us. Like there's the writer, there's me as the coach if I'm playing that role, and then the story is just there in the room. And we have this conversation, and all this energy starts spinning around. It's like, it could be this, it could be that. And they just, like, light bulbs go off. That's the magic that I just feel like, so lucky to participate in. And that's what it's funny, I would talk about it. I get so excited about it. I'm more excited about what's going on with that than anything to do with me. And, that's a big step to move outside of the personal longings that I had, personal dreams and ambitions that I had for my own stories, for my own storytelling. It was still within the scope of, it was about me. And at a certain point, your life and whatever you're putting in your stories is not about you. And it can take a while to mature out of that. It certainly did for me. I mean, I'm going to admit that now. I probably wouldn't have, like, even a few years ago, been able to say that in public. But it had to hurt for a long time to realize that, oh, okay, there's something bigger here. And when you can approach story that way and realize that there's so much more going on in it, and that you are there as the writer to serve it, to serve that energy, and that it's a gift to the reader. All the work that you pour into that ends up being a gift to the reader. So it's about so much more than you. I mean, it is fun to take credit. It's fun to say I did that. I feel very proud when I've finished a project, but it's about so much more than that now.
And I think that's really interesting, even for authors who are not intending to be coaches or work on other people's projects. When I think that statement of when you finish a book, it is a gift for your readers is important on so many levels, because when you gift somebody something, it is not yours anymore. It is then theirs, and they get to decide how they use it and what they do with it and how they enjoy it. And so it's kind of like if you gift somebody with, you know, a pack of crayons, you can't say you're coloring the wrong way with those, right? They're their
Yeah.
crayons now. If what they want to do is shave them up and melt them onto a piece of wax paper to make their picture, that's theirs. They can do what they want. So I think there is that grown-up writer ability to separate yourself from the story enough to be a little bit objective about it, to be generous with it, to let it go off into the world and have its own life. It's like sending your babies off to school, right? It's going to go and interact with the larger world, and people are going to have their own experiences of your stories, and they aren't going to be about the story. They're going to be about where that person was at in their life when they read your story, or what it was they needed out of it or got out of it in that moment. And I think for us as authors, we hold so tightly often
Mm.
to the stories, but if you can let them go, if you can set them free and then learn from how those experiences go, that you're in a much stronger position to be a career author. You know, if what you're looking
Yeah.
for as a strategic authorpreneur is a business, ultimately all businesses are about customer service, and
Yes.
your readers are your customers and your stories are your products, but your stories also in a way your customer. I think if
Mm. Mhm.
you have a certain obligation to your story to tell it well, to communicate with it, and to let it communicate with others. Like there's this weird, it's a product, but it's not static. It's not,
No.
it isn't, a story is not like making, you know, a notebook where the notebook is going to be the notebook regardless. The stories can shift and form and change, and they're much more fluid than that. They are like alive, like you said. There's that
Yeah.
energy in the room, and it's the possibilities I think are very interesting. And you talked about how you have an equal emphasis on the quality of the writing, the effectiveness of the story, and the personal journey of the individual writer. I totally jacked that from your website,
Oh,
but
cool.
it but I really like that it is, writing a book is not just about the end product. It is about the journey of the person writing that book as well. Is that we, by writing, are growing ourselves up. You know,
Yeah.
we are maturing as individuals and as writers. So I think that's a really cool way to look at this process.
You know, though,
um
can I just interject
yeah.
something here?
Hmm.
Because the thing is, too, is that we can often get stuck in thinking it's just about our own journey. You know, we can, with our writing practice, with our writing experience, and we sort of love that. But if we just think that it's about our own journey and we don't think it's also a product for somebody else, we can also get lost. You know, so I think that balance is really important between all those elements. And story is organic and it grows with you as you grow. And it's actually funny because we mentioned about like sending your children off into the world. Believe it or not, I had a much easier time thinking about my children. I have two daughters as their own beings that I was just there to help, shepherd into the world. I had a much easier time thinking about them as that and what my role was in relationship to them than I did about my writing. I mean, I just would hoard my writing, and it was so precious and never good enough. And I actually never treated my children that way. So I had to kind of learn from that too. It was kind of a strange thing. And now I know it's like, oh, okay, the writing is its own thing. I have to love it, but it's not me. I mean, that's what I try to tell writers. And the journey of creating something, I'm working with writers who have maybe just decided to start to write like a novel maybe it's based on some family history, but they only started writing last year and they're fully dedicated and they're learning on the way. And then I'm working with some writers who have been carrying around a story they've been wanting to write for 20 years.
Hmm.
And so story evolves and it changes, we have to change along with it. It's this relationship. It's the other thing I talk a lot about with the writers when I'm doing group work too, is that be friendly with your work, treat your work as a friend. set dates up and show up for them and say sorry when you need to, and things like that, so that you have this natural, organic kind of give and take relationship, because I think that's really what's going on, and how then a story it will translate that aliveness if we bring it to it.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, your book is not ready yet, right? So we can't rush out and buy it. Your nonfiction one, I know. Do you know what it's called or going to be called? Does it have a firm title yet, or?
I think it's going to be called Deep Story Design.
Okay, excellent.
So deep story design. What are my tagline? Inspiring strategies for successful storytelling.
Nice.
So I'm taking advice. You can call me up and say, try this instead. That's fine. Yeah, so it's close. I'm incorporating editorial feedback and in the final revisions. And I think I'm going to put it out myself, because I want it in the hands of my clients sooner than later. I don't want to wait 2 years after trying to take it around to traditional houses and stuff like that. So I think I want it ready sooner than later, and I just need to get my own butt in my chair.
Yeah, we don't want to wait 2 years either. So
no.
you should definitely get on that.
Yeah, it's grown out of an online course that I taught for several years. I haven't taught it for about a year because I'm trying to finish the book, but that too is going under a revision, so that'll be available at some point. The Deep Story Design online, and a revision course that I'm creating, because I'm working with people and they're finishing their books and they're like, now what? And I'm like, well, I've got something for you. Here's a strategy. But it's getting the work done, which it's true for all of us, right? How do we set up the day, set up the month, or the year to get it all done? So I struggle with that all the time. And sometimes I just collapse in a heap of overwhelm.
Yeah, I think as we all do. We talk about balance, but really it's more like juggling without dropping too many balls at any given time. You need to just be able to pick them up and then keep on going again.
Well, balance is dynamic. I always think about it as standing over the fulcrum of a teeter-totter. And if you have physically done that, how precarious it can be. It's just like you're always moving, you're always adjusting a little bit here, a little bit there.
Yeah.
So it's very active, and we fall off sometimes. Point is to get back on.
Yes, exactly. The don't quit part. I mean, I think you said earlier that not giving up is the thing. That is, if you are moving forward in some direction towards your goal, you're going to find new pieces to pick up for your puzzle, if nothing else, and be constantly learning things and growing and experimenting and experiencing the world out there is a really important to just keep moving. Now, because your book's not ready yet, what are a couple other resources that you love that you have on your own writerly shelf that you might suggest people check out if they are interested in the meantime?
Oh, like a book recommendation, something like that. I read a lot of, it's not exactly self-help, but I read a lot of Buddhist things as well, a lot of Pema Chodron, and, Liz Gilbert's Big Magic is good. Like I do a lot of these things about how to be in life as well, to be a creator. But you got me. I know there's I should have brought.
Well, you can ponder.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
But yeah, I'm always curious which are the go-to, because I find every author has one or two that are like their default if they need to sort of reset their storytelling. They tend to have something that really just lights the fire for them.
Well, I'll give you a really practical one.
Sure.
That not everybody knows about, but is just full of good stuff. And it's called Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight V. Swain.
Okay.
That has really, I've read a lot in playwriting as well. So there's another book. I'll give you some more obscure ones that might be kind of interesting. Well, there's Lajos Egri. I don't know if you know his book, The Art of Dramatic Writing. That's a playwriting book. Again, essential stuff. A lot of McKee's stuff has references there from that book. And what else will I reach for? I should have been prepared. Crystal, for more of these.
No,
things,
I need to just
there
spring
are
it
some.
on you. We want like the gut reaction. You can always send them to me after, and I can add them to the show notes, because we do put links underneath the episodes for people to follow up on if there's specific things we recommend. So
I do like The Writer's Journey, for Christopher Vogler, and Oh, there's a really great book. I heard in one of your other podcasts, somebody mentioned The War of Art.
Oh, yes.
The War on Art, Stephen Pressfield's,
Mhm.
which is great. A lesser known one about creativity, because I do a lot of other things too. I'm a creativity coach and I paint as well. But there's one called The War on Art. No, that's Stephen Pressfield. This Art and Fear.
Okay.
Art and
I don't
Fear
think I know that
by
one.
Robert Abbotsfeld. I could look it up. Yeah, I'll kind of look it up. That is a gem that restores your faith in creativity. And I do some work as well with Eric Maisel, who's a psychologist and creativity coach. And he has an excellent book called The Van Gogh Blues, which is about creative depression. So a
Oh,
lot of writers who struggle with creators are affected by depression in kind of a different way. It's really a meaning crisis. And he writes about that in a book called The Van Gogh Blues. So that's another one that is
mhm.
helpful. Anyways, okay, just
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think so much of how our industry works sets us up to really have these tough emotional battles to fight where,
yeah,
if you're submitting, you're just sending out expecting to be shot down and often getting shot down hundreds of times. And like the amount of faith it takes to stay up and to stay able to send it out again after, like think of that in a fight context. You've been basically KO'd how many times and you're still getting back up, shaking yourself off and trying again, right? It's a battle. It's an emotional battle. You're taking your personal private thoughts, you're putting them into
mm-hmm.
the world, you're inviting people to critique the heck out of them, and then negotiating with yourself and other people of what feedback do you take, what do you not. You've got to trust your instincts enough to know when to change things or not change things, and all the
Yeah.
while guessing, will other people like it like I've made it. Really, when you break it down into its elements, it's a fairly torturous exercise. And yet,
It's not fair. I mean, it's masochistic. It really is.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's not fair. And you have to be so sensitive to be a writer. You have to be able to navigate the inner landscape in such subtle ways. And then you have to be so tough to be treated with cold indifference on a regular basis,
hmm,
because what you've offered as your gift is not seen as a gift right away. It's seen as sort of like, do I want that? It's like picking ripe bananas at the grocery store. It's like
yeah,
it's neutral for those people who are looking and choosing, but it's not for us. And that is not. I mean, there a lot of people talk about it and write about it, and I don't like to dwell on it too much. But I'll tell you a funny story though. So I told you I ran a martial arts school for a while. Well, I got my black belt in Taekwondo, and I thought I picked up martial arts because I thought that it would help me be a better writer, because the discipline, the devotion, the practice, all these things. But I would do anything and everything to make myself a better writer, except just write and face that horrible thing, that horrible gauntlet you're talking about. So it's actually, I can attest and say, it's actually easier to get beat up in a sparring match, or it's easier to do 100 push-ups in a black belt test, or to break a wooden board, than it is to actually, put your stuff out there and wait for a negative response, or no response is kind of the worst. So, it takes a tremendous amount of courage and resilience and stamina, I guess. And I think now what I'm learning, actually, Crystal, is it also takes a tremendous amount of self-love. And that is a long row to hoe for most writers to get to that place. That we are often writing not from a place of self-love.
mm-hmm.
And the kudos we might get, or the yeses or the acceptances, that gives us that taste, that's where we want it, but it never really fills it. There's never really enough. There's more of the opposite. And so I'm working with that a lot more too, personally, and with the people I work with, that we have to find it in ourselves, pour it into our stories, and then
Mm-hmm.
let it go. It's
Yeah.
easy to say, it's not so easy to do.
Yeah.
I don't want it to just be sort of lip service, like these words, but I do think it is the only secret, if there is one, right? Was it Somerset Maugham said there's three secrets to writing? Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. So, but I do think for writers, because of what we deal with internally, that trying to cultivate that belief in the self and love of the self and love for what you do is really important. And then maybe, it matters less when things go out and they don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think thinking of it as just it's not the right time has sort of always been my mantra. It's either this isn't the right way or this isn't the right time for this. And it's giving yourself permission to keep going through that. Like I think there is a certain amount of, like we said, blind faith with the picking up the puzzle pieces that you'll eventually figure out a way to fit them together, and I think as the indie world has evolved, it has given us other options and other ways. For me, I know that if I was submitting the 100th letter, I would not be able to keep going. I'm that's just not in me. Or maybe it is, I shouldn't say that, but it definitely was not at the times when I was trying those approaches. And those letters coming back was destroying my love of writing, and I couldn't bear to let that happen. So I needed another way to go about it. And so I think, for those of us who love the writing more than we value someone else being the one to do all the work for it. You said you were willing to get a black belt to avoid the sitting down
Yes.
punishment part. I was willing to start a publishing company and like spend 10 years learning how to do all that stuff instead of learning how to deal with the constant rejection. And I figured, if my story's not good, people will tell me, but then I can fix it. I can't do anything about just a flat no. Like if it's not the right fit because of someone else's choices, then that's up to them. And that's not something I can control. So I definitely do better when I can pick a fighting ground in which I have a chance at improving or changing opponents or, shifting whatever. Like if I'm going to do battle, I want to have a shot at coming out the other side, at least with my bits intact, feeling like a whole human. You can bounce back from a lot of little things, but I think just knowing yourself, what your personality fits with is so important, and that's part of the growing up, is separating yourself from yourself enough to be able to reflect back and take a good look at sort of who you are and how you fit in the world and how your stories fit with all of those things, for sure.
Yeah. And can you trust your own timing? Can you accept it? I think I want to hear what your thoughts are about time, but I would say that I let time be an enemy for so long, and it was always too late and not good enough, and I should have had it done by now, and just always using time as a slave driver, and always losing. And to step back a bit, and I think our reconnecting 10 years later has helped to sort of put that in perspective, that what if I just allowed for maybe time is on my side. Okay, it didn't happen the way I planned it. Whose life does, right? Whose life does. But look what's happening now. Look at all these unexpected things. I mean, and that's just what a story is, right? These unexpected things that happen that in the end come together to mean something. And maybe I have a really good friend of mine who said, I want this, we'd say, we want this, we want that, and you can't have it all. She said, you can have it all, just not all at once.
Yes. So
I had
true.
this piece there and that piece here, and maybe this piece is coming down the pipe. So
it's just like our characters. In order for us to feel the victory with them, they need to have gone through that dark night of the soul moment. And I think as writers, for us to appreciate our victories, we have to have had those same, you've got a hole in the soul and it needs to be fixed just as much as the ones you assign to your characters. And that same process has to be gone through. We need an arc as writers so that when we get to stand up at the podium at whatever big event it is and make our keynote speech about how we rose above, we have something to say.
That's so true. And that's a lot of what I talk about and around in the book. Even though it's about story structure and character development, I try to bring it back to who people are in themselves. How do they feel about, the things they've gone through in their lives, and how characters are just like people. So are we willing to go through the same things that they do? And we can't unless we can't really write it down unless we understand those things. So I'm always sort of bringing it back. That's the third part. How are you growing? How are you growing as a writer? Who are you? What do you care about? What matters to you? What do you believe in? What are you willing to risk letting go of? And just give that to your characters, because the characters are human beings. That's how I see them anyways. They may be kind of compressed and modified, and there's more metaphor involved, but they represent what it means to be human. And that can be a lot of hard things at different times.
I think that honesty, that cracking yourself open to understand and mind those feelings is so hard to do, honestly, because you do have to examine everything that you've kind of been through in a different way.
The upside is that you can kind of project it onto another character. So you can kind of deal with it, but you're like, oh no, but I'm going to give it to her or him. I'm just going to, then I'll look at it that way from a distance. I mean, that is one of the benefits of being a fiction writer. When you choose, if you choose that, it's we can play around with a lot of different worlds and a lot of different people, a lot of different situations. And like, well, I would have done it this way in this situation, but maybe I'll try it this way for this one. That's actually one of the reasons that I thought that I wanted to write when I was a lot younger. It's like, what do you mean one life? What do you mean I can only go in one direction? What do you mean I can only do this? But I want to do all these other things. So writing can kind of give you that chance to live a lot of different lives. So there's some joy in that.
Yeah, there's lots of different possibilities. It is really, it's a game of possibilities. You can make anything you want to be reality for other people. Like our brains can't tell the difference between a story and reality when we're experiencing
Isn't that wild?
Isn't that so wild? Crazy. Yeah. And so we have the power to build alternate realities for people, which is amazing. As day jobs go.
As long as you can get your butt in the chair.
Yes. Right? Yes, exactly.
And get out of it and exercise as well. I'm gonna, so it's a balance, right? I tell to my writers, because I do these online writing sessions a couple times a week in these days, right? And every at least one Saturday a month, if not two. We always take breaks. Okay, get up, drink water, stretch your body. We do some shoulder stretches. Like, you are in a body. You are alive. Your stories are coming through this physicality that is you. So take care of it, because we can be so much in our heads here. Really try to encourage people to be in their hearts and be in their bodies more. And there's so much information and wisdom in these other parts of us too. So mind those too.
Well, on that note, I feel like, again, the time has flown by. This is a danger whenever we chat, is we sort of look up and suddenly the time has become poof, gone. Or not gone. I suppose we've stored it away as a treasured memory in a different format.
And editing is a great thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Edit things,
but if people are wanting to connect with you online, or if they want to cyber stalk you and find out if your book is out yet, where shall we send them?
Well, my website is Deep Story Design. So that's pretty easy to remember. Same on Instagram at Deep Story Design, and as well on Facebook. I'm a slightly lazy social media participant, but I am there. But I'm just focusing on those ones for now, or barely focusing. But you can reach me there, and then my email is available on my website, and that's undergoing a little bit of a revision too. So there's going to be lots of fun things to see in the coming months. And so thank you for asking. The online courses are going to have a bit of a soft launch in the summer and full on in the fall. And hopefully that book will be done by the fall too. So I will let you know.
Perfect. Excellent. Please do. And we can send it out to our mailing list. We have just one thing each week that we send out to people to help them on their journey. And so you could be our just one thing as soon as your book is ready. So
that's so exciting. Okay. Okay. That's more motivation to get it done, right? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate that.
Good. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come chat with us. And I am very much looking forward to reading your book when it's ready.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing how our story unfolds.
We'll have to. Like we won't wait 10 years to check in again.
I don't think so. Somehow, I don't think that's going to happen. I think we've got some more convergences.
Yes,
coming.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for your time and your great questions and personality and just what you're doing for writers. I really appreciate what you're putting out there and how much love you pour into what you offer, and joy. You make it fun, and you've enlivened my spirit around some of the stuff that that I think, oh, maybe I don't want to do that. And it's like, no, Crystal says, good. She says, go. So yeah, you put a lot of really good light into the world. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
So welcome back. So April had a very particular and interesting taking on this subject of the writing things, and I found so meaningful that over the course of her life, she was able to help so many people in the craft of storytelling, and her background in the movie industry, we can say, in crafting that genre of storytelling was so powerful and meaningful, not only for people that are genuinely interested in crafting a professional story, but also to people that really want to understand why we enjoy stories. And I think it's important for us to consider this. Um, there is something that we have to understand, and I think that April made sure that we understood. Like, it's fine and it's great that if we are able to write beautiful sentences, and it's great if we know the message we want to convey. But the problem with writing is that it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, I would say, to create engaging stories. Because something that even New Crystal said, when we are writing a story, we're actually, and we want this story to be sold, we are creating a product. And we have to give ourselves the liberty, the freedom to understand that once done, it's done. Other people are gonna think something about that. Toward the end of the interview, she gave an example, a story about herself. Now she became a black belt, so she can kick people. She's dangerous, but the importance of the story was that she knows martial art, and she knows that it's tough, and that is something that you really have to want to learn in order to understand. So all the discipline, the devotion, the practice. She said, I was genuinely interested in doing better. And I know that was difficult. But for me, sitting down and writing is way more difficult. And that is something that get me started to think about something else that an author that she actually mentioned in the interview, Stephen Pressfield said in the book, The War of Art. At the very beginning of this book, he says something very similar to what April said. So he was saying, he was relating something that happened in the Second World War. And so he was saying in this book, Hitler was an artist. So he was a painter. But he said, I'm going to push myself and say something, and probably people are not going to agree with me, but for me, it was easier for Hitler to start the Second World War than staring at the blank canvas. And I still remember that phrase because it was so powerful. And it's one of the things that she saw in every single person she helped was the ability to self-love ourselves. That's the single most difficult thing that she, in all these years of coaching, saw. Like, even for herself, she was saying, you have to come from a place of love. You have to love yourself, and you have to love the work that you're doing. And I'm not saying this to just sound cheesy. I do believe it's important to give ourselves the freedom to understand we are creating something majestically difficult, super hyper difficult. And once we put the final stop to that story, we have to give ourselves the liberty to just let other people give and share feedback about that. And the other thing that I don't know if you want to add something on that regard about the difficulty. I just want to know what you think of what April said, because I really think it's something that we as writers, we should be a bit more aware of.
Yeah, I think the idea of resistance is really important. And one of the things that often comes up in workshops and when talking to other writers and doing coaching is this procrastination and the ability to get distracted that we have, and how you're always kind of battling yourself and your attention. But there's a book by Nir Eyal, which is called Indistractable, that I read recently as I was looking at, you know, how can I focus in better on the creative stuff, and how can I kind of filter my world and my inputs and make sure that I'm not sort of destroying my creative bubble at the wrong moment, and still live in the world, but also how do I kind of keep that a bit separate. And it's really interesting in that he talks about, you know, he's talking about distraction, but actually distraction is resistance. It's we're effectively avoiding something that's uncomfortable, like that resistance. We're avoiding it by letting ourselves be distracted by something else, right? And so even though on the surface they aren't about the same thing at all, I think underneath is really the same principle, which is that that having to do the hard stuff, having to really dig in, and knowing, as you said, for both April and from the War of Art, there's those pieces around. It's easier to do these epic other things. I mean, I spent 2 decades building a 6-figure consulting business to avoid my writing. Like, that's a pretty elaborate scheme, with some epic consequences. And, you know, on the surface, you could justify that in all kinds of ways. But if we're being very, very honest, that's what I did. I mean, I've had 3 careers in avoiding writing. So there are lots of different motivations for that and lots of different reasons. But until you really dig down into it and you do that personal kind of discovery work on what do you really want, what is it that's pushing or pulling you, and how does all that come together, and that's when you kind of finally can figure things out and move forward. So I think, you know, we focus so much on the act of sitting and writing as the solution to the problem, but if we don't understand what we're avoiding, when there is that resistance, and you know what we are being distracted by and why, then I think it's hard to sort of unpick all those pieces. So just something to put into your thoughts and minds out there as you're listening to this is, you know, what are you doing that's hard because it's easier than writing? And just think on that a little bit and see what bubbles to the surface.
And I think we also have to be aware of something else that Stephen says. Um, when he says you have to be aware of the difference between what's important and what's urgent, and do what's important first, which is incredibly different because our brain is fighting against us. If I tell you, Krista, it's urgent for you to do that thing, but it's important also to do the other, you will go to the urgent stuff because it's like there is a time frame. Mm-hmm. You can write whenever you want, you think, yep. Right? But that thing, it's yeah. urgent. You have to, I don't know, check your Facebook status. You have to finish this important deadline with the client that you have. Like, there is the urgency. It's basically, mm-hmm. It's like a wolf at your heels. Like, I have to run. I have to do it. But I think the trick and the most difficult part is understanding that actually what's important, and we know what's important, in this case, is the writing part. We have to do that. If we don't do that, it's like we give in to the resistance. And I think what you said was very important. We have to distinguish between these two things, and we have to reassess what comes first. And there was another thing that I want to briefly say about something that April mentioned. She said this phrase. I think she quoted from somebody else. I don't remember who this person is, but she said, there are 3 secrets to writing. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. And I think this is one of the most powerful phrases she said, because it's really a secret what's behind the writing process. You can read however number of books that you want, but at the end of the day, for me, it's a journey of self-discovery. It's you, it's that chair, or if you like to writing while you're standing as myself, it's you and the writing pen or that keyword, and just figuring out how you work. There is something beautiful that Dan Brown said, the writer, the famous writer of thrillers, and he said something on this line: there are going to be days in which you don't want to write, and in those days, what's going to save you? It's your process. And I think this is so powerful, because if you know that you have to do a number of things, a number of steps to activate your writing things, you just need to do it. And I'll give you very briefly my example. When I need to write, and you know, Crystal, that I'm trying to do this on a daily basis, and I count the hours. I don't count the words, because words don't work for me. I know that the first 15 minutes are wasted. When I write, the first 15 minutes is scrapped utterly. But that's the platform I'm basing the next hour and a half, 1 hour and 45 minutes. After that, I'm basically warming up in those 15 minutes. But I assure you, everything inside me in those 15 minutes says quit, because you are writing shit. Okay? And I didn't want to use the word, but you are not writing good stuff, so you should just stop. I do believe that this thing is important for the people that are listening to us. Those things about the secret of writing, there is really no secret. It's just something that you uncover by yourself, and you adapt as you go. And I'm really interested in knowing your point of view on this, Crystal, because I know your writing process is different. But what do you think of this phrase that she said?
Yeah, I think, as you said, writing really is a process of discovery. And so what is fascinating is that our tendency is to want to learn things from people who are doing them successfully, which is great when it comes to things like, how do I do a mailing list, and how do I handle the business side of stuff? And, you know, I think we can learn from how other people do their writing process, but the actual creative process is so different from person to person that I think that the fact that there are 3 secrets to writing and no one knows what they are is really, no one knows what they are for you. You know, you can discover what are your 3 secrets to how you do your writing, but they aren't necessarily going to work for anybody else in that combination or in that way. And so it is so personal that you really, no one can tell you what those are, because you have to figure them out for yourself. So yeah, that's a fun other thing to think about, is how does that blend together? Do you know what the secrets are for you? Have you found those yet? Are you still looking? And I think that's why, you know, every time we listen to a podcast interview, or we talk to other writers at events, or we take a workshop from someone who's teaching us what did work for them, it's a possibility, and it's maybe a key to unlock a door to a different space that has all kinds of answers for you. And so it's really just mixing and matching and trying those things out, and seeing, you never know which is going to be the thing that leads you to discover one of your secrets. Speaking of discovering secrets and unexpected excitement, we have our curious jar, which, if you can see us on YouTube, you'll see it's like a white cookie jar with a label on the front, but inside is a wonderful world of exploration. So we have a bunch of colored papers, and each one has a little question written on it. I'm going to shuffle my hand around until Michele says stop.
Stop now.
Okay. It's a green one.
Oh, remember? I think the last time we had a green, that almost killed us. It was a very profound one. Do you remember that?
It was tough. Yes. Oh, wow. Okay. The green ones are hard, man. Why is it always the green ones? Okay. So the question is, what is the most powerful thing someone ever said to you?
Shift. Oh, geez. I see. Okay. I have the answer. I don't know if it's the most powerful, but I'm gonna get very personal here.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you a story of what happened a few years back. Well, more than a few years back, when I was a teenager. So every summer, I would go to visit my grandparents. And it was a city near um, near the sea, very far away from my Rome home in Rome. And so I like spending time with them a lot, but sometimes in the night I just wanted to do my things. For example, I wanted to read or I wanted to watch the TV. And again, I was a teenager. At some point, there was my grandfather that said, "Would you like to take a walk with me?" And I was like, I'm not really interested. I prefer to do something else. And we did those walks usually on a daily basis because we shared stories. And I was like, I don't know why I said that, but he made me realize that we were doing that because we were talking to each other. And I was like, maybe today you can just walk by yourself, I said. And he was like, yeah, I can walk by myself, but I can't talk with myself. And that one was like a slap on the face. I'm not proud to say that, but I think it's something important. It's the importance of sharing stories. And I was saying no to him. So it made me realize how important it is to speak with other people, especially if it's our family, how important it is to share stories. And if there is any occasion for us to share a story, we should take that chance or that occasion. So I would say the sentence was, I can walk by myself, but I can't talk with myself. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it just popped out. True
Yeah.
story. It happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think also I have a story that's really about connection as well, and not waiting. So I had an aunt, Auntie Margaret, who was lovely, full of humor, very generous, big laugh, made great pickles. Was one of her trademark items, and Nanaimo bars. Both were key pieces of my childhood growing up. And she got pancreatic cancer just before she graduated. She actually went back to school to become a teacher after her kids were in high school and getting older. And so she went back to get her teaching degree, and she got sick right at the end of her teaching degree. But that is something that she had always wanted to do. And she was studying business as well in combination. And when I went to see her in the hospital, she, we were talking a bit about life in general and all those kinds of conversations you have when you have a finite amount of time. And she just said, don't wait. Like, whatever it is that you're passionate about, don't wait, because you don't have all the time you think you have. And so that was, I think, obviously still sticks with me. I still get all kind of teary about that, and it's very motivating. It's her voice that I hear in the back of my mind whenever I'm making a decision about how I'm going to live my life or what I'm going to choose to do. And if there's something that I feel really excited about, or I feel like it's what I'm supposed to be doing, then that's what I hear when I'm making that decision, is that don't wait piece in the back of my mind. So I think that's definitely at the top or very near it in terms of things that have kind of fueled me and made a really big impression, and have had some fascinating ripple effects on how I have lived my life in the last, I guess it feels like almost 20 years. It's been quite a long time. So yeah, anyway, thank you, Auntie Margaret, if you're listening from wherever. And yeah, so for all of you, I would definitely love to hear, what is the thing that is the most powerful thing someone ever said to you? So you can send us an email, ideas@strategicauthorpreneur.com. You can post it anywhere where you can post comments, whether it's YouTube or on the show notes page for this episode at strategicauthorpreneur.com. And if you have a question, you can email it to ideas@strategicauthorpreneur.com and we will add it to our jar. The jar is getting low, people. There's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 questions left in the bottom here. So we need to have a little influx of curiosity to add
Need more
to the
difficult
curious
questions
jar.
that makes us say stuff that it's important. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also want to remind listeners that for show notes and for links to resources that we mentioned, and for all the coupons and discounts on the tools that we love, you can visit us at strategicauthorpreneur.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, and each week we'll make sure to just send you one thing that we think is going to help you in your authorpreneur journey.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode, where we'll be taking an in-depth look at different mailing list platform options for you. So we're always going on about growing your list, and we're going to actually dig into the specific tools that you can use to do that. I think between us, we've used more than half a dozen different mailing list services over the years, and we have some great suggestions for you and some things to watch out for and how you make a decision. So definitely pop back next week so you don't miss out on that. And last but not least, you know how important reviews are in the book world, and the podcast world is no different. So we would be forever grateful if you would leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on.
Thank you, and see you next week.
Bye.
In my whenever I teach a live workshop or an online workshop, I start every workshop with a 10-minute exercise I call Here and Now. And it's just 10 minutes where we write together in our notebooks, longhand, and just tune into the moment. So we take some deep breaths. It's a writing meditation. We're paying attention to the 5 senses that we're experiencing in that moment, the chair under us, the pen in our hands, the sounds in the room, or if you're in your own space. And we just write for 10 minutes, and anything can come up in that moment. The main reason is to be grounded and make a transition between where you were before and where you're headed in terms of your writing practice session, and just to be embodied as we write. But it's also because the more we practice capturing a moment, the more we're building those muscles, because in story, that's all you're ever doing is capturing a moment. And you're layering it, and you're weaving it, but it comes from this ability to kind of be here now and let it be ordinary. So we never share that writing. We never use it. It's not about your whatever project you're working on. It's just the practice. And it can be really helpful to just remember that you're a writer and you write. And sometimes you just write to write, not even to make anything. So that's a really good practice. And I encourage writers to do that all the time. In 10 minutes, we can grab 10 minutes anytime. So you don't squander even 10 minutes. Just, you keep your hand moving and you keep that brain, heart, hand connection going. So just write. You learn from writing.